My husband was halfway through explaining why our 4-year-old daughter should remain in his custody when his father placed a sealed envelope on the library table. We were at Cedar Vale, the Brooks family estate outside Charlottesville, Virginia. Ethan had chosen the room carefully. Every wall reminded you whose house you were in. Oil portraits, framed land deeds, photographs of men cutting ribbons in front of buildings, with the Brooks name carved into the stone. Ethan sat across from me, with one hand resting on the folder he had used to accuse me of adultery. His mother, Victoria, sat beside him. Our daughter Lily was upstairs with a nanny, unaware that the adults below her were discussing whether she belonged in the only family she had ever known. Ethan's attorney had offered me an agreement that afternoon. I would leave the carriage house on the estate. I would waive any claim connected to Brooks' development. I would accept a temporary custody schedule that gave Ethan most school nights. In return, he would not publicly pursue allegations that I had deceived him about Lily's paternity. He described it as a way to limit the damage. Victoria called it the most dignified solution available. I had spent 11 years in the Army before moving into county emergency management. I knew what pressure looked like, even when it came in a calm voice and a leather folder. That did not mean I was not afraid. My hands were damp beneath the table. I had read the proposed agreement 3 times without absorbing most of it. Henry Brooks, Ethan's father, had said almost nothing since entering the room. At 70, Henry was not an emotional man. He usually let everyone else finish before deciding exactly what he wanted to say. Finally, he pushed the sealed envelope toward the center of the table. "This came directly from Meridian's compliance office," he said. Ethan stopped speaking. Victoria folded the linen napkin in front of her. Then she unfolded it and began again. Henry looked at me first. "Maya, the document Ethan showed this family did contain language issued by the testing facility." Ethan leaned back slightly, as if that settled everything. Then Henry continued. "But it did not say what he claimed it said." No one moved. Henry opened the envelope and removed 5 numbered pages. The copy Ethan had shown us contained only 2. He placed the missing pages beside Ethan's folder. "There were 2 separate relationships analyzed," he said. "One involved Ethan and Lily." His fingers remained on the final page. "The other involved Ethan and me." Ethan's face changed. Victoria looked toward the library doors. Henry did not raise his voice. "Before anyone signs another document, we are going to discuss both results. 3 weeks earlier, I had believed my husband was arranging a routine hereditary health screening. I had no idea he was preparing to accuse me of cheating, remove me from our home, and use our daughter to force me into a settlement. To understand why I did not see it coming, you need to understand who Ethan had been before all of this. I met him at a charity race for military families in Richmond. He was not running. He was standing beside a folding table, trying to stop paper cups from blowing across the parking lot. I had recently returned from an overseas assignment, and was still adjusting to ordinary conversations. He handed me a cup and looked at the timing chip on my shoe. "You know the race ended 6 minutes ago, right? I like to finish things properly. That sounds exhausting." He smiled when he said it. For years, Ethan was the kind of man people trusted. He remembered birthdays, treated restaurant staff well, and rarely raised his voice. He was close to his parents, especially his father, and I took that as evidence that loyalty mattered to him. That was part of what made his betrayal difficult to recognize. His family owned Brooks Development, a regional real estate company founded by Henry's father. It had grown from a few apartment buildings into commercial developments, retirement communities, and large pieces of valuable land. Henry remained chairman and controlled the voting shares through the family's inheritance arrangements. Ethan served as chief operating officer and expected to take over most of the company's daily control when Henry retired. Victoria handled the public side of the Brooks name. She chaired foundations, hosted benefit dinners, and remembered exactly who had attended which fundraiser 5 years earlier. She was never openly hostile to me in the beginning. Her criticism usually sounded like concern. She worried my Army career would make marriage difficult. She wondered whether children needed a mother with a more predictable schedule. She suggested my independence sometimes made it hard for Ethan to feel needed. When Lily was born, I left active duty, remained in the Army Reserve, and accepted a county position directing emergency preparedness. I still worked late during storms, fires, and major public safety incidents, but I was home far more often. Ethan and I moved into a renovated carriage house at Cedar Vale. The estate owned the land, but we paid for most of the renovation. I put nearly all the money from selling my Richmond condo into that house. I never insisted on having my name added to the property documents. Ethan said the estate structure was complicated, and changing ownership would create unnecessary problems. I accepted that explanation. Henry referred to the carriage house as our home, and I thought that was enough. Lily grew up treating the path between our house and her grandparents' home as if it belonged to her. She rode her scooter down it, fed the koi with Henry, and helped Victoria arrange napkins for dinners she was too young to attend. There were ordinary mornings, preschool pickups and books Ethan read so many times he no longer needed to look at the pages. We had real good years. Ethan did not become someone else overnight. He made one selfish decision, then another. Once he had something to hide, each new lie made the next one easier. I also ignored things I should have questioned. Because of my deployments, Ethan had always handled more of our finances. Even after I came home, I let him continue. When he said the estate documents were too complicated to explain over dinner, I stopped asking. When Victoria made choices involving Lily and described them as family traditions, I often let them stand, because arguing seemed unnecessary. I thought I was avoiding conflict. Mostly, I was allowing other people to make decisions in places where I should have had a voice. The first warning sign was a cotton swab. Henry had recently been treated for an irregular heartbeat. Ethan said the family physician had suggested collecting a more complete hereditary health history. One Saturday morning, he came into the kitchen carrying 3 home testing kits. "Dad wants everyone in the direct line screened," he said. I was making pancakes while Lily sat at the counter pressing blueberries into the batter with one finger. "What kind of screening?" "Cardiac markers. Maybe a few other hereditary conditions. The family office is coordinating it because they already keep the medical records." That sounded unusual, but the Brooks family maintained files for everything. Property maps, insurance schedules, birth certificates, school records, and old hospital documents. A family health file did not sound impossible. Ethan swabbed the inside of his cheek first. Then he crouched beside Lily and told her they were doing a science experiment. She opened her mouth because she trusted him. When he sealed her sample, he wrote her name twice on the label. He crossed out the first version and rewrote it underneath. "You should use a clean label," I said. "It's fine." He placed clear tape over the correction. The moment was small enough to ignore. A week later, I noticed an $860 charge from Meridian Kinship Laboratories on our credit card statement. Ethan was sitting across from me at the kitchen table, answering email. Was the health screening really this expensive? He glanced at the amount. The family ordered an expanded panel. Why did it come out of our account? They'll reimburse us. He turned the statement toward himself and went back to his laptop. 2 days later, Victoria came to the carriage house before Lily's bedtime. She brought Lily a new dress and placed a bottle of wine on the kitchen counter. While Ethan helped Lily try on the dress, Victoria stayed downstairs with me. "Henry's 70th birthday dinner is next week," she said. "I know. He plans to make an announcement about the company." "What kind of announcement?" "That is Ethan's news to share." She ran one finger along the edge of the counter. "Transitions can be difficult for men, especially when they have spent their lives trying to meet a father's expectations." I asked whether something was wrong. She smiled. "All men worry about becoming their fathers. Some worry they never will." That evening, I asked Ethan what Henry intended to announce. He was helping Lily brush her teeth. "Dad may transfer more voting control to me. That's what you've been working toward. It should be good news." He kept looking at Lily through the bathroom mirror, instead of turning toward me. Later that night, my phone notified me of a transfer from our joint savings account. $40,000 had been moved into an account labeled Brooks Capital Reserve. "That includes the money from my condo," I said. "The company needs to demonstrate liquidity before the transfer." "Why are we using personal savings? It's temporary. When will it come back?" "After the board meeting." He kissed my forehead and went upstairs. I stayed at the table, staring at the transaction. The following morning, the Meridian testing box was gone from the recycling bin. I still did not assume Ethan was planning something against me. I thought he was nervous about taking over the company. His relationship with Henry had always been difficult. Henry could be warm with Lily and respectful toward me, but with Ethan he became demanding. A delayed project was evidence Ethan had failed to plan. A missed call became a conversation about priorities. Ethan had spent most of his life trying to earn approval. Henry rarely expressed directly. That did not excuse what he did. It only explains why I initially read his behavior as anxiety. The week after the samples were mailed, he began staying at the main house after dinner. He said Henry was reviewing company documents with him. When he came home, he was distracted and easily irritated. One night, I found him sitting alone in the kitchen after midnight. A white envelope lay in front of him. When he saw me, he turned it face down. "Is that from Meridian?" He placed one hand over it. "It's nothing final. Can I see it?" "Not tonight." For a moment, he looked as if he might hand it to me. His fingers moved toward the edge. Then his phone rang. Victoria's name appeared on the screen. He picked up the envelope and walked outside to answer. That was one of the moments I replayed later. He had a chance to tell me. Maybe he had several. The following morning, the envelope was gone. A few days later, I asked whether the results had arrived. "Not yet," he answered before I finished the question. "You checked the Meridian portal yesterday." I had seen the website in the browser history of our shared computer when I printed Lily's preschool forms. "The analysis isn't complete. Is Henry all right?" "Yes. Are you?" He removed his watch and placed it beside the sink. "Maya, can we not turn every family issue into an interrogation?" I had asked 3 questions. Still, I backed off. "Fine." He apologized a minute later, held me, and said the possible company transition was putting him under pressure. I wanted the familiar version of him to be real, so I accepted the apology. The following Sunday, Victoria invited Lily to spend the afternoon at the main house. When I arrived to collect her, they were sitting in the sunroom with several family albums. Lily pointed to a photograph of Ethan when he was 5. "Daddy looked like me." Victoria closed the album. "Children often see what they expect to see." "What does that mean?" She stood and asked whether I wanted coffee. That evening, Lily told me Grandma had taken another cheek swab because the first one did not have enough science. I called Ethan into the laundry room so Lily would not hear us. "Why was your mother collecting another sample?" "The testing facility requested a replacement." "Why didn't you tell me?" "You were at work. You could have called." "It was a cotton swab." He reduced the concern to the size of the object, rather than answering why I had been excluded. I told him I wanted the paperwork. He promised to bring it home the next day. He brought flowers instead. Around the same time, Ethan changed the password on our shared financial dashboard. He began carrying his laptop upstairs every night. Victoria called Lily Henry's little legacy twice in 1 week, then stopped using the phrase completely. At preschool pickup, Lily's teacher asked whether there was going to be a change at home. Lily had told another child she might be sleeping at Grandma's house for lots of nights. When I questioned Ethan, he said Victoria was probably planning a sleepover. I knew the explanation did not fit, but I wanted it to. The alternative meant accepting that my husband and his mother were discussing my daughter's future without me. Henry's birthday dinner was held in the long dining room at Cedar Vale. There were 22 guests, including relatives, 2 company board members, and several old friends. Victoria had arranged the seating so Ethan sat directly beside Henry. Lily sat between Ethan and me, swinging her shoes beneath the chair and drawing on a paper placemat. Dinner was almost over when Henry stood. He thanked everyone for coming and spoke briefly about the company. Then he said he intended to transfer more voting authority before the end of the year. Ethan's hand tightened around his water glass. Henry started to mention Lily. Ethan interrupted him. "Dad, before you do that, there's something everyone needs to know." Victoria lowered her eyes. That was when I realized she already knew what he was going to say. Ethan placed a white folder on the table. I received the genetic results. Henry looked at him. "We agreed to review those privately." I tried. The words came out quietly. For half a second, he looked toward me. Then he opened the folder. The analysis excluded me as Lily's biological father. For several seconds, I thought I had misunderstood him. Lily continued coloring. "What did you say?" He pushed 2 pages toward Henry. "I'm not her father." I looked at the document. It carried Meridian's logo, Lily's initials, and language about an excluded relationship. The numbers meant very little to me. "That isn't possible." Victoria placed one hand over Lily's drawing. "Not in front of the child." I turned toward her. "You knew he was going to do this." "Maya, please lower your voice." Her tone was calm enough that several guests looked at me instead of Ethan. Then he began listing my reserve weekends, emergency assignments, and overnight travel. Every absence he mentioned had actually happened. He never named another man. He did not need to. He said he had ignored warning signs because he trusted me. He said Lily was innocent and he intended to remain involved in her life despite what I had done. He had prepared the accusation so he could sound injured and generous at the same time. Once, in the middle of it, his voice faltered. He looked at Lily. She had stopped coloring and was watching him. Ethan's hand closed around the edge of the table. For a moment, I thought he was going to stop. Victoria placed 2 fingers against his wrist. He continued. I reached for the document. He pulled it back. I want the complete file. This is what I received. This is 2 pages. Victoria spoke before he could answer. This is not the time for legal arguments. It became a legal matter when your son accused me of adultery in front of 20 people. Lily looked up from the placemat. What's adultery? I stood and lifted her from the chair. Ethan reached for her. You're not taking her. She is going home with me. This is her home. The carriage house is her home. Victoria's expression changed. The carriage house belongs to the estate. The sentence had clearly been discussed before that night. The dinner was not only meant to disgrace me, it was meant to remove me. Ethan said I should stay somewhere else, until independent testing could be arranged through attorneys. I asked whether he had already hired one. He did not answer. Henry remained at the end of the table, reading the pages. I looked at him. Do you believe this? He raised his eyes. I believe we need the entire file. Victoria said his name sharply. He ignored her, but he did not stop Ethan from following me outside. When I reached the carriage house, my key no longer worked. Ethan stood several feet behind me. The locks were changed this afternoon. Lily had both arms around my neck. You planned this before dinner. I planned for the possibility that you would react badly. Then he looked at Lily. His mouth opened. Maya, I waited. He could have told me then. Instead, he glanced toward the main house. I'll have someone bring her clothes tomorrow. I carried Lily to the car. As I buckled her into the back seat, she asked whether Daddy was angry because she had drawn on the tablecloth. I told her none of it was her fault. That night, she slept in her party dress, at a hotel near the highway, because her pajamas were locked inside the carriage house. After she fell asleep, I sat on the bathroom floor and called Ethan 12 times. He answered once. Bring me the complete file. You need to calm down. I am calm. You left a family dinner while people were trying to help you. You changed the locks. For everyone's safety. The wording sounded prepared. I asked whether he had filed for divorce. There was a pause. My attorney advised me not to discuss pending matters. The next morning, a process server met me in the hotel lobby. Ethan had filed 2 days before the birthday dinner. He was asking for temporary primary custody. His petition said I had behaved unpredictably after being confronted with genetic evidence. It referred to my reserve obligations, emergency response work, and access to government vehicles. It also claimed I had threatened to relocate Lily without warning. That allegation came from a conversation 6 months earlier when I had mentioned a possible promotion in another county. He had taken one hypothetical sentence and turned it into an escape plan. The filing included photographs from the dinner. In one of them, I was standing with Lily in my arms, pointing toward Victoria. The picture did not show the incomplete pages. It did not show the changed locks. It showed only my reaction. Our joint checking account still worked, but the savings account had been emptied. The original $40,000 was gone, along with another $44,000 transferred on the morning of Henry's dinner. My card was declined at a pharmacy when I tried to buy Lily's allergy medication. I called Henry. Victoria answered his phone. He needs time, she said. I need access to my home and the testing records. You should have considered stability before bringing another man's child into this house. She said it quietly. I told her never to speak about Lily that way again. She ended the call. At the first temporary custody conference, Ethan did not ask the court to remove himself as Lily's legal father. His attorney argued that Ethan was the only father Lily had known and intended to continue caring for her, despite my supposed deception. That allowed him to question my honesty while presenting himself as the responsible parent. The judge did not give either of us full custody. Lily was ordered to remain in the county, and we received an alternating schedule until independent testing could be completed. I had 4 nights. Ethan had 3. On paper, it looked balanced. In reality, he had the home Lily knew, her bedroom, most of her clothes, her grandparents, and the school routine we had built. I had a furnished apartment, with 2 plates, 1 borrowed lamp, and a child who asked why the rooms smelled like paint. The first night Lily stayed with Ethan, I drove past Cedar Vale twice. I did not enter the driveway. When she returned, she was carrying a new stuffed rabbit. Daddy said he loves me even if I'm not his real girl. I pulled the car to the side of the road. I kept both hands on the steering wheel until they stopped shaking. Then I told her the adults were confused and that she had done nothing wrong. She studied my face. Are you confused too? Yes. I was not confused about who her father was. I was trying to understand how long Ethan had been preparing to make me look dishonest. That evening, I stopped calling him. The next morning, I called Naomi Reed. Naomi had spent 12 years as an Army lawyer before opening a family law practice in Richmond. Her office was above a pharmacy, in a building with unreliable heating. There were no leather chairs or polished conference tables. She read Ethan's petition without interrupting me. Then she studied the 2 pages he had presented. Where are pages 3 through 5? I was never given them. This says Relationship Analysis B. Where is Analysis A? I don't know. She placed the papers flat on her desk. There were 3 sample codes. 1 for Ethan, 1 for Lily, 1 for Henry. Naomi pointed to the 3rd. If this was only a paternity test between your husband and your daughter, why was his father included? For the health screening. These pages are not a medical screening. That was the first clear crack in Ethan's version. Naomi did not promise me a victory. She said we needed an independent test and the complete Meridian file. She also told me not to confront Ethan immediately. Let him keep using the explanation he prepared. If he changes it later, we document the change. Before the appointment, she asked me to collect only records I could legally access. I found a law firm invoice dated 6 weeks before Henry's birthday. The description referred to marital asset planning and inheritance exposure. Then I found a draft property settlement Ethan's assistant had accidentally emailed me months earlier. The wife would leave the family residence, waive claims to business distributions, and accept restrictions on relocation. It had been drafted before Lily's cheek was swabbed. I read it after Lily fell asleep on the sofa. Her shoes were still on. One hand rested on the stuffed rabbit Ethan had given her. Ethan had not received a frightening result, and then decided to end our marriage. He had been preparing to remove me before the testing took place. The next morning, Lily asked why I had slept on the floor. I told her my back hurt. She did not believe me, but she was 4 and had no better question to ask. The independent test took place 2 days later. Ethan arrived with Victoria. He barely looked at me. A technician checked our identification, photographed each participant, and sealed every sample separately. Lily asked whether the swab would hurt. No, it will be over before you count to 10. She counted to 4 and declared it finished. As we were leaving, Ethan followed me into the parking lot. Victoria remained near the clinic entrance, pretending to check her phone. Maya. I kept walking toward my car. We need to talk before this gets worse. I stopped. You told our daughter she might not be yours. I told her I loved her. You keep saying that as if the second sentence cancels the first. His eyes moved toward the clinic. You don't understand what is at stake. Then explain it. I can't. You mean you won't? He rubbed one hand over his jaw. If you keep pushing into the family documents, you could damage more than our marriage. What did you see on the first page, Ethan? His expression changed. I waited. He looked toward Victoria. Then he stepped back. My attorney will contact Naomi. He walked away without answering. The result arrived 4 days later. Ethan was Lily's biological father, with a probability greater than 99.999%. Naomi handed me the page. I read the number once. Then I went into the restroom and cried so hard I had to cover my mouth with a paper towel. I had never doubted the answer. What broke me was seeing something I had always known placed into language Ethan could no longer twist. When I returned to Naomi's office, she slid a glass of water toward me and waited. That afternoon, I picked Lily up from preschool. She climbed into the car and asked whether the science people knew who her daddy was. I told her they did. Is it Daddy? Yes. She nodded, satisfied, and asked for crackers. For her, the question was finished. For the adults, it was getting worse. Ethan's attorney first suggested Meridian had made an error. Then he said Ethan had misunderstood a preliminary result. The testing facility's records showed that Ethan had opened the complete 5-page file 3 times. Once from our home computer, once from Brooks Development, once from his phone. The first occurred 9 days before Henry's dinner. The last occurred the morning the locks were changed. After Naomi showed me the dates, I went home and opened the kitchen drawer where I kept Lily's hair ties. Inside was a plastic bracelet from the hotel where we had spent that first night. The date printed on it matched Ethan's final download. While Lily and I were driving toward a celebration, Ethan had already seen every page. I called him that evening through the parenting application. He answered after the 4th ring. "You knew the independent test would confirm you were her father." "Maya, this is not a conversation we should have without attorneys. You had the complete result before the dinner. I had a confusing set of analyses. You removed 3 pages." Silence. Then he said, "Stop trying to turn this into something simple. You told everyone I cheated. That was simple enough for you. I was trying to keep the situation contained." "What situation?" He breathed into the phone but did not answer. "Does Henry know?" I asked. The line became completely still. That was the first time I heard fear in his silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. "Leave my father out of this. You included his sample. You don't know what you're doing." "No, Ethan. I'm beginning to understand exactly what you did." He ended the call. The missing money provided another clue. The $84,000 had been moved into a new entity called EB Continuity Holdings. Ethan created it 10 days after accessing the Meridian results. It had no customers and no real business activity. Its main purpose appeared to involve receiving Ethan's future distributions. Naomi believed he was trying to move expected assets outside the normal divorce process. I did not need every line of the corporate paperwork explained to me. The sequence was enough. Ethan opened the genetic findings. He created the company. He moved our savings. He prepared the settlement. Then he accused me. During the next custody exchange, he arrived alone. Lily ran toward him with the stuffed rabbit tucked beneath one arm. He knelt and hugged her longer than usual. For a few seconds, he looked like the father I remembered. After Lily climbed into his car, he closed the door and turned toward me. "You're going to destroy my father. I haven't spoken to Henry. You requested records that involve him. You used his sample to accuse me. I was trying to buy time. For what?" He glanced through the window at Lily. "My entire life was about to disappear. So you decided hers should become uncertain instead?" He looked at me then. There was anger in his face, but also shame. "You think I don't know how bad this looks? This isn't about how it looks. You always do that." "Do what?" "Stand there like the answer is obvious, and anyone who can't make the right decision is weak." I almost answered immediately. Then I stopped. There had been years when Ethan felt judged by me, just as he had felt judged by Henry. I could admit that without accepting what he had done. "You could have told me you were afraid. And you would have done what? Gone straight to Dad? Called a lawyer? Made me sit in a room while everyone decided whether I was still a Brooks? I would not have told Lily she was not your daughter." His face tightened. He opened the driver's door. Before getting in, he said, "You don't know my mother." I watched him drive away. At the time, I thought he meant Victoria had pressured him. Later, I understood he also meant that she was guarding a secret older than our marriage. Meridian eventually released the full 5-page analysis. The 2 pages Ethan had shown the family were authentic sections. He had not invented the wording. He had removed the headings identifying which relationship the exclusion described. Analysis A tested Ethan and Lily. He was her biological father. Analysis B tested Henry and Ethan. Henry was excluded. Analysis C examined the expected grandparent connection between Henry and Lily. That connection was also excluded, exactly as expected if Ethan was Lily's father, but Henry was not Ethan's biological parent. Ethan had taken a genuine conclusion from the second analysis, removed the names, and presented it as though it applied to the first. When Naomi explained it, I asked the only question that made sense. Why would he destroy our marriage to hide something he did not cause? Because he thinks the inheritance depends on it. Several governing documents referred to lineal descendants. Ethan apparently assumed that if Henry learned they were not biologically related, he would lose the company and future distributions. Lily's sample had exposed the mismatch. Instead of asking Henry, Ethan decided to make Lily the problem. If he claimed she was another man's child, removed me from Cedar Vale, and completed the divorce quickly, no one would need to examine why Henry's genetic markers did not match his. The emails between Ethan and Victoria confirmed that they had coordinated their actions. They spoke about containing the consequences. keeping Henry from receiving the complete analysis, presenting Ethan as a father willing to care for Lily, despite my supposed betrayal. One message from Victoria read, "Sympathy will matter if custody becomes contentious." Another message from Ethan said, "If Maya accepts the arrangement, no one will need to ask why my markers failed." There was also a public statement prepared before Henry's birthday dinner. It described Ethan as a devoted husband who had discovered my long-term dishonesty during a hereditary screening. It praised his willingness to remain in Lily's life. My name appeared once. When I read it, I remembered Ethan sitting alone at the kitchen table with the white envelope. He had almost handed it to me. He had called Victoria instead. Hesitation did not undo the planning that followed, but it showed he understood there was another choice. 2 days later, Henry called me. It was the first time I had heard from him since the dinner. "I received notice that my sample was part of a disputed analysis," he said. "I'm sorry you had to learn about it this way. I have not decided what I feel about the result." His voice was controlled, but slower than usual. "What I have decided is that Ethan will not receive additional voting authority tomorrow." He told me there would be an emergency meeting at Cedar Vale. Naomi and I were invited. Before ending the call, he added, "There is something in this history Ethan does not know." That was how I returned to the estate 3 weeks after being locked out. The emergency meeting began at 6 in the evening. Naomi sat beside me with the Meridian file and the financial records in separate folders. Ethan sat across from us. Victoria sat beside him. Henry remained at the head of the table. 2 board members joined by video. Dr. Lena Park appeared on another screen from Meridian's compliance office. Ethan's attorney began by arguing that the divorce and the inheritance dispute should remain separate. Henry interrupted him. They became connected when my sample was used to accuse Maya. Dr. Park identified each sample code and displayed the headings Ethan's copy had omitted. The analysis between Ethan and Lily showed that he was her biological father. The analysis between Henry and Ethan excluded Henry. Ethan looked down. His attorney stopped writing. Dr. Park explained that Meridian had never issued a preliminary finding excluding Ethan as Lily's father. The complete file had been available through his secure account from the beginning. Naomi asked whether he had opened it. Dr. Park confirmed all 3 downloads. Ethan finally spoke. "I misunderstood the format." Naomi placed his edited copy beside the original. The page numbers had been removed. The relationship headings had been covered with white digital blocks before the pages were printed. "You removed the labels," she said. His attorney objected. Henry told him to let Ethan answer. Ethan looked at his father. The document was confusing. Dr. Park remained neutral. The first page contains a summary table listing each tested relationship by name. Victoria shifted in her chair. "I believe Ethan was advised that this was the least damaging way to manage an extremely private discovery." "Advised by whom?" Henry asked. She did not answer. Naomi displayed the email about keeping Henry from seeing the complete analysis. Victoria read it, then looked at Ethan. "You told me Maya had already threatened to expose this." "I didn't even know there was anything to expose," I said. Ethan rubbed his thumb against his wedding ring. "I was trying to avoid chaos." "You filed for divorce before the testing was completed," I said. "Our marriage already had problems." "That is not what you told everyone at the dinner. I thought you would take Lily and leave." "So you told her she might not be your child?" "I told her I loved her. You made a 4-year-old wonder whether she had to earn her place with you." His face tightened. For the first time that evening, he looked directly at me. "I didn't know what else to do. You could have shown me all 5 pages." He looked away. Naomi moved to the financial transactions. She explained the missing savings, EB continuity holdings, and the proposed settlement that removed me from the property while preserving Ethan's expected distributions. Ethan described the company as a contingency plan. "For what contingency?" Henry asked. Ethan's shoulders lowered. "For losing everything." Henry watched him for several seconds. Then he opened the sealed envelope. "What you did not know," he said, "is that the genetic result could not remove you from the family agreement." Victoria stood so quickly that her chair struck the wall. "Henry, not here. It should have been discussed years ago. It certainly should have been discussed before you used Lily against her mother." Ethan stared at him. "What are you talking about?" Henry removed an old document from the envelope. "When you were 17, you collapsed during a soccer match." I knew that part of Ethan's history. He had been hospitalized with a heart rhythm problem. The doctors requested family medical information. Henry continued. Your blood type raised a question. Further testing answered it. Victoria sat down again. Henry looked directly at Ethan. I learned then that I was not your biological father. Ethan stared at him. At first, there was no visible reaction. His hand remained on the edge of the table, and his eyes stayed fixed on Henry, as if he were waiting for the rest of the sentence. No one moved. The video screens at the far end of the library gave off a faint electronic hum. Somewhere behind Ethan, one leg of Victoria's chair settled against the wooden floor with a soft scrape. Even Ethan's attorney lowered his pen. I realized I had stopped breathing. For weeks, I had been waiting for Henry to explain the missing pages, but I had never imagined one sentence could strip away every argument Ethan had prepared. Ethan blinked once. His eyes found his mother before she could look away. Mom? Victoria pressed her hands together, but said nothing. Ethan pushed his chair back. The legs dragged unevenly across the floor. You knew? Ethan, your father and I made a decision. My father. The words came out sharply enough to stop her. Victoria's mouth remained open, but Ethan raised one hand before she could continue. For the first time since the birthday dinner, he did not look controlled. He was not measuring his words or checking whether his attorney approved. He looked stunned. He turned back to Henry. You knew for 25 years? Yes. No one spoke. Henry did not look away. And you watched me read that analysis without saying anything? I did not know the recent testing had taken place until after the dinner, but you knew what the result could show. Henry's jaw tightened. I knew there was a part of your medical history we had never explained to you. Ethan stood, but he did not go anywhere. He took one step toward the fireplace, stopped, and pressed his fingers against his forehead. No one tried to fill the pause. Even Victoria remained seated. When Ethan finally turned around, the anger was there, but beneath it was something less controlled. You let me spend my entire life trying to prove I was good enough to inherit your company. This was never about whether you were good enough. You don't get to say that now. His voice broke on the final word. Victoria rose from her chair. Ethan, don't. She stopped. He faced her. Who was he? Please, this is not the place. You helped me destroy my marriage because you didn't want anyone asking who my father was. You don't get to ask for privacy now. Victoria gripped the back of her chair. The man died before you were born. Did Henry know him? No. Did you love him? She turned toward the window. That was her answer. Ethan gave a short laugh and sat down again. He missed the center of the chair slightly and caught himself against the table. I had spent weeks seeing him, only as the man who had accused me, emptied our account, and made Lily question whether she belonged to him. In that moment, I saw the fear underneath what he had done. It did not make him innocent. It made his choice worse. He had been terrified of losing his place in the Brooks family, and rather than admit that fear, he had placed the same terror inside our daughter. Henry waited until Ethan was looking at him again. Then he placed the old document between them. When I learned about your birth, I had a decision to make, Henry said. You decided to lie. Yes. Henry did not soften the answer. You were 17. You had just collapsed during a soccer match, and you were frightened about your health. Your mother and I believed telling you then would cause more harm. And after that? Henry glanced at the document, but did not push it forward yet. After that, every year made the delay harder to explain. Ethan rubbed both hands over his face. So you just kept going? Yes. The paper remained untouched between them. No one reached to open it for him. For several seconds, Ethan only stared at the first page, as though reading it would make Henry's confession permanent. Then Henry moved it closer. This amendment was created the year after your hospitalization. Ethan finally lowered his hands. The agreement identified him by name as Henry's son and permanent beneficiary. It also included any children legally recognized as Ethan's descendants. The board had approved it years earlier. Nothing in the wording depended on a biological connection. Ethan read the first page. Then he returned to the beginning and read it again. You already secured my place. Yes. The company shares? Subject to the same professional requirements as before. The inheritance did not require me to be your biological child. No. The word settled over the room. Ethan's fingers remained on the page, but he did not turn it. Victoria still could not meet his eyes. The loss he had been trying to prevent had never been waiting for him. Henry had already chosen to remain his father. the family agreement had already secured Ethan's position. Lily was included because she was Ethan's legally recognized child, and, as the complete analysis confirmed, his biological daughter as well. The answer had never been hidden inside the testing results. It had been waiting behind a conversation none of them had been willing to have. Instead of asking Henry one honest question, Ethan had accused me of adultery, frightened Lily, emptied our savings, and tried to use custody to force me out of Cedar Vale. He looked at me. You don't understand what it was like to read that result. His voice was quieter now. I thought about the hotel bathroom, the changed locks, and Lily asking whether she was his real girl. I understand what it feels like when someone changes the meaning of your family without giving you a chance to answer. He looked down. Naomi displayed the final message obtained from the company server. Ethan had sent it to Victoria the night before filing for divorce. If Maya agrees to leave before Dad's transfer, the paternity issue becomes the explanation for everything. No one will need to ask why my markers failed. Victoria had responded. Then make certain she believes fighting will cost her Lily. The message remained on the screen. Victoria did not deny writing it. Henry removed his glasses. I learned you were not biologically mine, and continued raising you as my son, he told Ethan. You learned Lily was yours, and still chose to make her doubt it. Ethan closed his eyes. There was nothing left for him to blame on a confusing file. The board suspended Ethan's voting authority that evening. He was not removed as a beneficiary. The amendment was irrevocable, and Henry said he would not have disinherited him even if he had the power. But Ethan's executive position depended on responsibilities he had violated when he used company funds, employees, and systems to prepare the scheme. An independent audit began the following week. Victoria resigned from the family foundation after the board learned she had used its staff to prepare the public statement accusing me. Henry asked her to leave Cedar Vale, while they decided whether their marriage could continue. Before leaving the library, Victoria stopped beside my chair. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she looked toward the ceiling, where Lily was still waiting upstairs. I thought I was saving my son. You were helping him take my daughter. Her face tightened. I know that now. No. You know the plan failed. She looked at me then. The distinction hurt her. I did not take it back. The custody hearing took place 9 days later. The judge reviewed the independent paternity result, the complete meridian analysis, Ethan's download history, and the messages discussing how fear of losing Lily could pressure me into accepting his proposal. There was no dramatic confession. Naomi asked when he first saw all 5 pages. She asked why he removed the headings. She asked why he filed for divorce before Henry's birthday. She asked why he told Lily she might not be his child after already knowing she was. His answers became shorter. He said he had panicked. He said Victoria had encouraged him. He said he believed I might expose the family history. The judge asked whether I knew anything about Henry's paternity before Ethan accused me. Ethan admitted I did not. Temporary primary custody was granted to me. Ethan received supervised parenting time while a family therapist evaluated the effect his statements had had on Lily. The court prohibited both of us from discussing genetics, inheritance, or the divorce with her. The transferred money was frozen pending division. The altered document and financial transactions were referred for further review. No one was arrested in the courtroom, and Brooks' development did not collapse overnight. The immediate consequences were enough. Ethan lost unrestricted time with Lily. He lost his executive authority. He lost access to the money he had moved. He also lost the ability to control what everyone else believed had happened. I did not move back into the carriage house. Henry offered to restore my access and put a long-term occupancy agreement in writing. I thanked him and declined. After the locks had been changed, Cedar Vale no longer felt like a place where Lily and I could live without someone else deciding whether we belonged. I rented a townhouse near her preschool. For the first month, she slept in my bed most nights. She asked whether Ethan still loved her. I told her he did, but that adults sometimes hurt people they love when they are frightened or selfish. It was not a perfect explanation. It was the best one I had. Ethan sent me a long apology through the court-approved parenting application. He wrote about pressure, fear, and confusion. He did not directly say that he had knowingly used Lily to force me into a settlement. I did not answer. Several weeks later, he sent a shorter message. I knew the analysis said she was mine. I almost told you the night I got it. Then I called my mother. That message stayed on my screen for a long time. It confirmed what I remembered about the envelope on the kitchen table. He had hesitated. Then he had chosen the plan. I forwarded the message to Naomi and closed the application. 8 months later, Lily started kindergarten. On her first morning, she insisted on wearing one sock with stars and another with a yellow cat. Our townhouse kitchen was narrow, and the refrigerator door hit the table if I opened it too far. There were no koi ponds, formal dinners, or portraits of the Brooks men. Lily liked it because her bedroom window faced the playground. Ethan completed counseling and eventually moved from supervised sessions to short daytime visits. His relationship with Lily did not return to normal simply because the schedule changed. She asked why he had said she might not be his real daughter. A therapist helped him answer without blaming me, Victoria, or Meridian. Henry remained in Lily's life. He came to school events, sat in the same folding chairs as the other grandparents, and never asked us to return to Cedar Vale. Victoria wrote one letter that contained no excuses. She admitted she had turned Lily into leverage because she was afraid Ethan would lose the Brooks name. I kept the letter. I did not arrange a visit. The divorce took almost a year. I recovered the money I had invested from the sale of my condo. Ethan remained a beneficiary, but lost his executive position while the audit continued. One evening, Lily found the stuffed rabbit Ethan had given her during the first custody week. "Do we have to throw him away?" she asked. "No. Can I keep him?" "That's your decision." She placed the rabbit on the shelf beside her other toys and went back to coloring. Lily never needed a genetic test to decide who she was. The adults around her were the ones who had made belonging complicated. If you believe Maya was right to refuse to return to Cedar Vale, share your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe for more stories about family secrets, betrayal, and the evidence people never expected to survive.